My suitcase hit the porch steps so hard it bounced once before falling on its side. The sound echoed down the quiet street like a gunshot. I stared at the front door of the house I had grown up in. The paint was still pale blue. The porch light was still cracked on one side. Everything looked the same, except the lock. "Dad left the house to me," my sister Emily said from behind the door. Her voice sounded cold. "You need to leave, Caroline." 3 weeks after we buried our parents, she had changed the locks. The neighbors' curtains moved. Mrs. Harper across the street stepped onto her porch like she was checking her mail, but she was watching me. My hands were shaking. I wasn't just grieving my parents. I was homeless. "My things are still inside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should have thought about that before causing drama," Emily replied. Drama. That word hit harder than the suitcase. My name is Caroline Whitaker. And that was the day my sister erased me from my own home. But she didn't know something yet. Emily told everyone she was handling the estate. She said it so calmly that people believed her. At church, she cried into soft white tissues and hugged relatives like she was the strong one holding us together. "Caroline is just having a hard time," she told Aunt Linda. "She's not very stable since Mom passed." I stood 2 feet away when she said it. Not stable. I felt like I was fading into the wall. People gave me soft looks like I was fragile glass. No one asked for my side. No one asked why my suitcase had been on the porch. Emily controlled the story. She told neighbors that Dad had trusted her more with finances. She said I never cared about the house. She said I wanted to move away anyway. None of it was true. But lies spread faster than grief. I remembered something she forgot, though. Dad had always been careful with paperwork. He never rushed big decisions. And Mom used to say that important things were written clearly. Emily always rushed. She hated waiting. She signed things without reading them. If she had rushed this too, maybe she had made a mistake. And paper never lies. I worked at a small property management office in Ohio. It wasn't fancy. We handled rent payments, maintenance calls, and stacks of boring paperwork. Most days were quiet and simple. After I missed a few days for the funeral, my supervisor, Mr. Dalton, called me into his office. "You seem distracted, Caroline," he said, folding his hands on his desk. "I understand you've had a loss. But we still need accuracy here." I nodded quickly. "I know. Sorry. It won't happen again." I needed that job more than ever. Had no savings. My paycheck barely covered food and gas. Since Emily had locked me out, I had been sleeping on my friend Tara's couch. I couldn't stay there forever. If I lost this job, I would have nowhere to go. So I swallowed my pride and worked harder than I ever had. I double-checked every document. I stayed late. I learned more about property law than I ever cared to before. That was when I noticed something important. Deeds were powerful. One small mistake could change ownership. One missing record could undo everything. And that thought stayed in my mind. Every day at work I handled property deeds. Transfers, titles, signatures. I watched how ownership moved from one name to another. It looked simple on paper, but it wasn't simple at all. One wrong date could void a transfer. One missing witness could raise questions. One unrecorded document could change everything. I began paying closer attention. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was learning. Emily had rushed everything after our parents died. She handled the funeral, the paperwork, the calls. She told me to rest and focus on grieving. At the time, I had been too tired to argue. Now I saw it clearly. She hadn't wanted me involved. What if she had made a mistake? What if the house wasn't fully transferred the way she claimed? Dad had been careful with documents. He kept copies of everything. He once told me, "Property isn't just walls. It's proof." Proof. That word echoed in my mind. Emily loved shortcuts. She hated waiting in lines or filling out long forms. If she had rushed the house transfer the way she rushed everything else, maybe something had been left undone. Maybe she hadn't erased me completely. One night, while cleaning out my car, I found a small box of things I had grabbed before Emily locked me out. Mail. Photo album. Mom's spare key ring. The key ring felt heavy in my palm. There were 3 keys on it. 2 were house keys. The third was small and silver. I froze when I saw it. Safety deposit box key. Mom once told me, important papers should never sit in kitchen drawers. She believed banks were safer than people. I couldn't remember the last time she mentioned the box. But I remembered her taking me with her once, years ago. She had signed papers carefully and told me to watch how things were done. Emily had never mentioned a bank box after Mom passed. Why? If there were important documents, Emily would have bragged about handling them. She would have used them to prove she was right. Unless she didn't know they existed. My heart started beating faster. The key felt warm in my hand like it was alive. I looked at the tiny number stamped on it. This could change everything. Or it could change nothing. There was only one way to know. The next day I went to the bank during my lunch break. My hands were sweating so badly I wiped them on my skirt before walking inside. The bank smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. I stepped up to the counter and showed the clerk the small silver key. "I think my mother had a safety deposit box here," I said. Her name was Margaret Whittaker. The clerk typed on her computer. Then she paused. "It's listed under Margaret Whittaker," she said slowly. "And Caroline Whittaker." Blinked. "Me." She nodded. "You're a co-owner." My legs felt weak. Emily's name wasn't there. The clerk checked the records again. "The box hasn't been opened since last year. Before Mom passed." I signed the form carefully. My signature looked steadier than I felt. The clerk led me to a quiet room with small metal boxes lining the walls. When she placed the box in front of me and left, the room felt very still. I turned the key with shaking fingers. The lock clicked open. Whatever was inside could prove everything. Or destroy what little hope I had left. Inside the box was one large envelope and a smaller folder. Nothing else. The envelope had Dad's handwriting on it. I would have known it anywhere. Strong, neat letters across the front. Property deed. My breath caught in my throat. I opened it slowly. The paper inside was thick and official. The original deed to our childhood home. I scanned the names. Margaret Whittaker. James Whittaker. And below that, in clear print, Caroline Whittaker and Emily Whittaker. Equal ownership. Cool. Not one name. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The signatures were older, dated years before Mom got sick. Everything looked properly signed and witnessed. Emily had told everyone Dad left the house to her alone. That was a lie. I felt anger rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. Anger would not help me. Proof would. I looked at the smaller folder next. It held copies of past tax payments and insurance forms. Everything showed both daughters listed as future owners. Emily hadn't mentioned any of this. But something still bothered me. If this was the original deed, how had the house been recorded under her name? On the next day at work, I waited until my lunch break before checking the county's public records database. My heart pounded as I typed in our home address. The listing appeared quickly. Owner. Emily Whittaker. Only her name. I stared at the screen, feeling both shocked and calm at the same time. The record showed a transfer date 1 week after Mom passed away. That was impossible. Mom had been in the hospital that entire week. She had barely been awake. She could not have signed anything. I pulled up the digital copy of the recorded document. The signature looked rushed. Messy. Nothing like Mom's careful handwriting. Emily had moved fast. Too fast. She had recorded a new transfer, claiming sole ownership. Somehow, she had pushed it through before I even understood what was happening. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Emily hadn't just locked me out. She had tried to erase my name from history. But now I had the original deed. And paper never lies. I didn't call her. I didn't yell. I didn't storm into the house like a scene from a movie. I stayed calm. I made copies of the deed, photographed every page, and filed them in a folder I carried in my backpack. Every detail mattered. Dates, signatures, witness names, they all had to be perfect. After work, I spent hours at the library reading about probate law and property disputes. The words blurred at first, but I slowly pieced together what could help me challenge Emily. There was a free legal clinic 2 towns over. I called, explained my situation briefly, and made an appointment. They couldn't give me full representation, but they could guide me. Emily thought I was weak. She thought I would crumble. She had no idea I was building a case brick by brick, proof by proof. She had rushed, but I had patience. And patience mattered more than charm or aggression. That night, I sat on Tara's couch, staring at the deed, tracing Dad's signature with my finger. I remembered how careful he had been with every line. He had wanted fairness. He had wanted both his daughters protected. Emily had ignored that. And now, her shortcuts were going to be her undoing. The lawyer at the clinic studied the deed carefully. Her glasses slid down her nose as she flipped through the pages. If this wasn't properly recorded, and if there was pressure involved in the other document, this can be challenged in court, she said. Challenged, I repeated under my breath. That word sounded sweeter than I expected. Emily's favorite word had always been final. Everything she said was final. Nothing could be questioned. She thrived on that confidence. The lawyer's expression changed slightly as she asked, "Did she already take out loans against the property?" Pause. "I don't know." Her eyebrows rose. "That matters. If she did, it complicates things. But it can still be corrected if you prove ownership." Ownership. Proof. That was all I needed. When I left the clinic, I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Emily had made a mistake by rushing. And mistakes can be corrected. Patience, proof, law, they were on my side. I spent the next day digging through public records again. Home equity loans, mortgages, liens, anything that could show whether Emily had acted recklessly. Sure enough, I found it. A home equity loan taken out 1 week after the funeral. 1 week after she changed the locks. She didn't just take the house. She was using it for her own benefit. I felt a surge of anger, but I didn't let it control me. Anger could ruin my plan. I took a deep breath and wrote down every detail. The date, the amount, the bank, and every signature. If this went to court, it would get messy for her. Not messy for me. For her. I had the deed. She had rushed and lied. The evidence was stacking up. And I was ready. I went back to the house the next evening. The street was quiet, the air thick with the smell of rain. Emily opened the door slowly, her expression sharp and wary. "You need something?" she asked. I handed her a copy of the deed I had photographed. My hands were steady. I met her eyes calmly. "That's not valid," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "It is," I replied softly. "It proves ownership. Equal ownership." For the first time, I saw fear flash in her eyes. Not anger. Not smugness. Fear. She slammed the door, but the smile she used to wear, the one that said she had everything under control, was gone. This was the first move in a long game. And now the pieces were in place. She whispered when she opened the door again, just enough for me to hear. "You'll ruin everything." "No," I said softly. "You did." She shut the door firmly this time. I didn't knock again. I didn't shout. I had learned one thing from Dad. Power isn't about being loud. It's about being patient, being prepared, and waiting for the right moment. I walked back to my car, carrying the copies of the deed. My heart felt steady. My mind was calm. The next move was mine. And I was ready. The lawyer filed a formal challenge in the county probate court. The notice went out. Family members started calling. "What's happening? Are you trying to take everything?" they asked Emily. Emily told them I was being greedy. I didn't argue. I didn't call or text. I waited. Paper speaks louder than gossip. Every date, every signature, every witness was documented. Everything Emily had done in a rush was now under scrutiny. And the more she tried to control the narrative, the weaker it became. Patience. Proof. Well, that was my strategy. And it was working. At work, life continued. My supervisor called me in again. "Your personal issues are affecting your focus," he said. I nodded, apologetic. I didn't mention the deed, the bank, the lawyer. My personal fight had to stay separate from my professional life. So I stayed late. I completed every task. I became meticulous, precise, perfect. If I was going to fight at home, I could not afford to lose at work. My reputation at the office had to remain untouchable. And slowly, something surprising happened. A senior clerk quit suddenly. My manager needed someone organized, calm, and capable. He chose me. Promotion. Small raise. More responsibility. Recognition. Emily had called me unstable. She had said I would never manage anything. She had lied. I was rising. And she was sinking deeper into her own mistakes and debt. I realized then that the real battle wasn't only for the house. It was for respect. For my dignity. For proving to myself that I wasn't powerless. The court finally set a hearing date. I arrived early, the folder with all my evidence in my bag. Emily walked in moments later, designer suit sharp, her smile polished and practiced. She glanced at me once, maybe thinking I would flinch. I didn't. The courtroom was filled with whispers and shuffling papers. She strutted past me like she owned the place, but I noticed the tension in her shoulders. Confidence can only hide fear for so long. When the judge called the case, she sat upright, flipping through her own papers with a careful precision. I handed over my copies of the original deed, photographs, and a timeline of her actions. Every document was in order. Every detail matched the bank statements and public records I had meticulously gathered. The judge's gaze was steady as he asked about the loan she had taken. Emily's fake composure faltered for a split second. That brief crack was all the proof I needed that she hadn't thought everything through. The bank representative testified next. She explained the home equity loan had been signed solely by Emily, claiming she was the owner. That was the first real crack in her story. If ownership was shared, her signature alone misrepresented the situation. The room fell silent. Her lawyer shifted nervously in his seat. Emily's charm, practiced smiles, and quick explanations couldn't undo what the documents revealed. I sat quietly listening. Every word she had lied about, every shortcut she had taken was unraveling. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply observed. The truth was doing the work for me. More documents were reviewed. Hospital records confirmed that Mom was hospitalized on the day Emily claimed she had signed the property transfer. Dates didn't match. Witnesses confirmed she had rushed the process. The judge leaned forward, reading through the evidence carefully. Emily's confidence started to fade, replaced by a quiet panic. I could see it in the subtle twitch of her hand, the tight line of her mouth, the shallow breaths she tried to hide. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly scared. And it felt satisfying, but in a calm, controlled way. Not revenge in anger. Justice. Finally, the judge made a ruling. The transfer to Emily was declared invalid, pending a full review. Ownership temporarily returned to both of us. The home equity loan investigation began. Emily stepped outside the courthouse shaking. She avoided my eyes like the truth itself was too heavy to face. She had rushed. She had lied. And now she was paying the price. It wasn't over yet, but the balance of power had shifted. And for the first time since she changed the locks, I felt a sense of control. News of the investigation reached her employer. She worked at a financial firm, and they didn't take kindly to employees involved in legal disputes that could affect their reputation. She was placed on leave. All because she had acted in haste. All because she had lied. I didn't contact her. I didn't gloat. I simply watched the consequences unfold naturally. The truth and patience were enough. And I realized then that true power isn't loud. It doesn't need threats or screaming. It's quiet, meticulous, and patient. Weeks later, the final judgment came. Equal ownership of the house was confirmed. The responsibility for the loan was placed fully on Emily since she had signed it alone. She had no savings left to cover the mistakes she had made. The house would be sold legally, split evenly between us. She had nothing left to fight with. Nothing. I felt a calm satisfaction. Not anger. Not revenge. Just relief and justice served in its quiet, patient way. We signed the sale papers quietly. No drama. No shouting. No one had to witness our victory. The house sold for more than expected. After debts were cleared, my share was clean. Fully mine. Fully earned. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the house. It was the proof that honesty, patience, and preparation always win over lies and shortcuts. I finally felt free not just financially but emotionally. I used my share wisely. A small condo, savings accounts, and investments for the future. Peace, stability, and a life built on my own terms. At work, I continued to rise. Promotions, responsibilities, and respect came naturally. No one doubted my focus or dedication. The weak, powerless sister Emily had labeled me as was gone. I had transformed into someone capable, prepared, and unshakable. In the end, the house was never the victory. The deed was never the power. The real victory was knowing my worth. Staying calm. Preparing carefully. Letting truth and justice take their natural course. Emily lost everything because she underestimated me. I didn't have to fight loudly or aggressively. I simply stayed calm, patient, and precise. The first time I locked the door of my new home, I smiled quietly. The sound was different this time. It wasn't fear or anger. It was peace. It was mine.